The Conservatives are the largest party. They don't have an overall majority at this stage. The Prime Minister called this election because she wanted certainty and stability. This doesn't seem to look like certainty and stability.
Welcome to Polling Politics. I'm Joe Twyman, co-founder of Delta Poll.
And I'm freelance political journalist Marita Conte.
Our guest this week is Rob Hutton. Rob is the UK political correspondent for Bloomberg News. Previously, Rob works as journalist for both the Daily Mirror and the Financial Times. He is the author of Romps, Tots and Boffins, which is more difficult to say than you might imagine, and Would They Lie to You? And his new book is Agent Jack, the true story of MI5's secret Nazi hunter. Hello, Rob.
Hello.
Tell us about secret Nazi hunting. How did this come about?
So I found out about this in 2014. There was a time before October 2014 when British politics was actually really quite quiet. I know.
Yeah,
and
I barely remember. No,
and in order to fill my empty days, I used to sometimes go to the National Archives when they released documents under the 30-year rule, as it's now no longer called, and the Security Service, MI5 archive releases. And they opened up this file that I don't think they really appreciated the significance of, which revealed this wartime operation to identify and sort of divert British fascists, which had been vastly successful, and so successful that they had to cover it up at the end of the war, effectively, because they were so appalled at what they'd found.
Wow. And so this is a work of non-fiction.
This is a work of non-fiction. So in 1942, they dealt with this weird problem at MI5. They spent the first 2 years of the war, they've been absolutely convinced that the reason that Germany's advanced so fast through all of Europe is because of fifth columnists. The idea that you have traitors behind the lines who guide the troops in. And this is absolutely believed all the way through Britain, all the way up to the top of government. And MI5 has been looking for the fifth column. And at the end of 41, they say, we don't think there is a fifth column. We don't think there ever was one.
Turns out the fifth column was the friends we made along the way.
Yes, well, but along the way, as you say, what they have found in their hunt for the fifth column are lots of people who want to be fifth columnists, but can't find a fifth column.
Aspiring fifth columnists.
This is exactly like the new centrist party for the past
Yes. So, well, funnily enough, there is a moment...
Should I just point out, perhaps for legal reasons, it's not exactly like the new centrist party.
So, Victor Rothschild, who is an MI5 officer, as well as being a Rothschild, says...
You could do those in those days. You just an international financial playboy and an MI6 agent.
So he says, if there isn't a fifth column, maybe we should set it up. He has this agent working for him, a man called Eric Roberts, who...
not the Eric Roberts, presumably.
Well, he's the Eric Roberts to me.
Not Julia Roberts.
Not that Eric. Not that Eric.
Brother.
No, another Eric Roberts. He has this man working for him, and Roberts identifies himself to a fascist that he's come into contact with as the Gestapo's man in London under a false name, Jack King. Sort of to see.
So his name was Jacking, and no one caught on to this.
So yeah,
No.
The purpose of this podcast is that we're going to try and basically not make you finish any sentence. And we will just interrupt with something unrelated.
When do I storm out? Roberts identifies himself as a fascist, and he then spends the next couple of years. Initially, the idea is that he just says, look, Berlin just wants me to find people who will be useful if there's an invasion. But the people he starts recruiting aren't just happy passing on names, and they start passing on intelligence too, and they want to commit acts of sabotage, and they want to organise violence. At one stage they're discussing whether they can assassinate Eisenhower, and he decides the safest thing to do is to set them to spying. And by the end of the war, he's identified 500. This one agent has identified 500 people who would be useful to Germany in the event of invasion, or as MI5 put it, people who we should lock up if there's an invasion, and an inner core of about 20 people who are regularly committing treason and are spying as they think for Berlin, and are coming up, even though they're very ordinary people, they're sort of factory workers and secretaries and stuff, they're coming up with really good intelligence.
And who's going to play Agent Jack in the film?
I would quite like Tom Hardy to play Eric Robertson. I've worked it all out. You can see it, yeah. Because I think Tom Hardy can play anyone.
On the subject of crazy plans, then, I'd like to now talk about the boundary changes.
I would like to apologise to you and to all our listeners about Joe's segues, which just get worse.
I'm going to go and get a coffee, and you can talk about the boundary
This week's
changes.
segues are really first class. The Boundary Commission has published its final proposals for new parliamentary boundaries. Anyway, sorry, where were we? Yes, basically they want to reduce the number of MPs from 650 to 600. Do we think 50 MPs will vote for their jobs to be abolished?
But that being said, because I remember obviously, like all the mess of the past few months/years, when they tried to get that through originally, I do remember hearing that it was very much like second hand, but there were definitely whispers that the Whips had managed to get the numbers for that. So if they'd managed it then, I do wonder. I don't think they will do it now, but I think it is definitely sort of like doable. It's just a question of the wrong
they
time.
Had a majority. They had a majority then, and they don't have a majority now, and they all hate each other now, and I just can't see it. I mean, I've got to admit, I didn't even go to the briefing. I mean, it's so far from something that's going to happen. So far as I can see, there are all sorts of ways in which MPs are at the moment turkeys voting for Christmas, but this particular Christmas. These turkeys are not, I think, going to vote for.
In Lebanon, they still use the census that they used in the 1930s because they basically decided that was good enough. well, nothing has changed in that country since.
How do we do local housing taxation in this country? We base it on what your house would have been worth in 1990 if it had been built.
Yeah, so I think this is
explain that to your French friends.
And so I think this will just be the same thing that we'll just stick with 650 constituencies, the same boundaries until one has only 4 people.
It's also I mean the sort of the whole thing. There is a massive case for redoing the boundaries, but the driving force of the boundary thing was David Cameron's 2009 pledge to cut the cost of politics, because that was going to be. I mean, younger viewers can tune out now. That was going to be how we were going to get back from the expenses scandal. This is a decade-old project, and even then it was a pretty poxy, silly sort of as a solution to the expenses scandal, cutting the number of MPs. It wasn't obvious that was the sort of the solution. It was just sort of something that had occurred today. The other thing they were going to do was make sandwiches more expensive in Portcullis House.
I think one's got more chance of getting through than the other. I don't even have a segue for the next thing, so we're just going to go straight into it. Tracy Crouch, the Minister for Sports and Civil Society, has announced a £5 million budget to pay for 5,500 of children in the most disadvantaged areas in Britain to join uniformed groups. Uniform groups specifically like the Scouts.
Are we back to the fascists?
The Scouts, the Guides and the military cadet forces. Now, I'm not going to suggest they're fascists. The money will be targeted in the poorest third of the country, areas like Blackpool, Burnley, Coventry and Greater Manchester. But it's not just the Scouts and the Guides. It also includes things like the St John's Ambulance, the Volunteer Police Cadets, because apparently that's a thing, and the Woodcraft Folk. Every militant lefty's worst nightmare. Marie, were you ever a Scout or a Guide?
I mean, it will massively surprise you that absolutely not. Obviously not. Have you met me?
I have, and I only asked because I assumed that Rob was, and so I wanted to.
I was actually thrown out of the Cubs for laziness.
How old was a man in his 20s?
How lazy are we talking?
Did you get your lazy badge?
I did. That would have been the only badge I'd got.
I'm not quite sure if this is going to make a difference to disadvantaged kids, because apparently these things are middle class pursuits at the moment.
I think it's quite
incredibly hard to get kids into the Cubs. I mean, it's easier to get them into Eton, I think, around where I live. There is a waiting list, and I was
about to say, I think it's a good idea, but so how old is it for kids, did you say?
Yeah, very much for kids. They're not so keen on getting...
Thing, like literally, if you're already a kid who's like not having a great life and maybe a bit bullied and stuff, in what world would becoming a child cop help?
I think the problem, actually, as I understand it, the reason, in my capacity as a parent of small boys, the reason that it's difficult to run these organisations now is it's very hard to get volunteers, because in, say, South East England, all the parents are working 50 or 60 hours a week, and also becoming a volunteer to do the Scouts now, you have to have a CRB check, and lots of forms, and it's just sort of so. Actually, the crisis of places isn't so much, and this is largely anecdotal. I'm sorry, on a polling podcast, how appalling. Anecdotally, the problem for places isn't a lack of kids wanting to do it.
It's all right. We'll pretend it's a qualitative interview.
Right, okay, fine.
The anecdotes will be fine.
Yeah.
God, between that and the boundary changes, we're just really going for all the exciting topic this week.
Yeah, it's just a shortage of volunteer parents to run the things.
Speaking of interesting ideas,
Is he segueing?
So he always does it. You get
Right.
used to it. I mean, no, actually, that's a lie. You don't get used to it.
The Guardian is
He once
launching.
said, speaking of
Today
nouns,
program, isn't it?
I feel you're not showing me the respect that these segues deserve. The Guardian is launching a new flagship podcast. This was
Who would
announced-
want to be on a podcast?
Exactly. This has been announced. It's going to be a daily news podcast.
can you imagine the amount of segues per week?
This is going to be remarkable. Hosted by their political editor, Anushka Astana. It's going to have 6 new audio journalists that have been hired to work on it, and it's going to be executive produced by Leo Hornack, who they've hired from the BBC, and he's previously worked on This American Life. Can you imagine, Marie, what it'd be like working on a podcast with like, a really top producer?
It sounds fun, doesn't it? Like, it sounds like something I would want to do one day.
Yeah, remarkable. Rob, you've obviously been working in journalism for many years now. Do you see this as a natural evolution for newspapers?
It's really interesting. I was really surprised. I mean, I have to say I share an office with Anushka, who's currently on maternity leave. So I'm not. She is an excellent choice to do something like this.
Well, because
And
previously she was at Sky.
Previously
so
she was at Sky,
so she has a broadcast experience.
And yeah, so she knows how to do all that kind of thing. And she's been doing these sort of video journalism projects for The Guardian. When I'm reading stuff on the move, I really don't want to watch videos. I hate the little sort of I vox popped 5 people videos, and one of them thinks it's a bad idea, and one of them thinks it's a good idea, and I would much rather read myself. That's my bias, but this does seem to be the way that everyone's going. And I suppose the thing is, I suppose the idea is that these things are sort of very cheap to put together. Though, I mean, obviously this thing is very cheap.
Yeah,
to put together.
obviously when you put in as much professional effort as we do, it's by no means straightforward. But I imagine something The Guardian would be relatively...
With their 6 journalists and their professional producer, will be much cheaper. So the other question is, I mean, it'll be really interesting to see how they do it, and whether there is enough political news. And the trouble with political news at the moment is you just end up talking about Brexit all the time, which is...
We have some familiarity with that.
I've heard of it.
And you can see the Today programme has clearly decided that they can't, because all political discussions end up being a discussion about Brexit, they had to stop talking about politics, which is great because I've sort of got my mornings back. But on the other hand, it turns out that lots of their other listeners have been getting their mornings back as well. So there's
which is a problem for public sector broadcasting.
Yes.
So this is clearly an area where technology has had an impact. And recently we had the TUC's General Secretary, Francis O'Grady, say that a 4-day week was a realistic goal by the end of this century, thanks to evolving technology and communication. Now, Rob, you studied artificial intelligence at Edinburgh University. So if you went to Edinburgh, we assume you're either incredibly posh or Scottish.
I'm not going to answer that.
But obviously, artificial intelligence...
That was less true in the 90s.
right, I understand. Obviously, artificial intelligence is this huge growth area, and it will have an enormous impact on many areas of our lives. But do you think a 4-day week is going to be one of the consequences of this?
Doesn't feel like it at the moment, does it? I mean, to be fair, I suppose 100 years ago we were working a 6-day week. So we have gone down. It's possible we could go down again. There is a weird thing at the moment, again, going back to the thing we were talking about the scouts and volunteers and so on, because now, compared to the situation sort of 25 years ago, now it is normal for both parents to be working and to be working quite hard quite often, and so there aren't the time to do the things that you want to do. And so at some point you can easily see a situation where people turn around and say, actually I'd like to buy back effectively a day of my week, and I will earn less in order to be able to just have a slightly less mad life. I mean, it's all we could be in a situation. We could be in one of those periods at the moment where in 30 years' time people look back and they say, but you you were working 50 hours a week and your partner was working 50 hours a week and you were paying somebody else to look after your children, and, and obviously the thing that you should both have done is work a bit less and be a bit happier.
But I do find what we were saying earlier, I think that's a choice you can kind of make when you're freelance, of saying, I'm in this, which is exactly what I've been doing for just over a year now, of actually being like, you know what, I am not currently earning as much as I could be earning. I'm entirely aware of that. But also, most of the time, I work 7-hour days at most. And that's really nice. That's just really pleasant. And, and I do, financially, I'm kind of, obviously my rent is far too expensive, basically, for the amount of money I'm earning. But equally, I just have a nice life. And I think, it would be good for more people to be able to have this choice, being like, actually, you know what, I will actively make the choice to earn a bit less, but just have a better quality of life.
I think, obviously, we're all of us here are in a privileged position to be able to have some choice in that. But I think the movement towards sort of the gig economy and things like that, but also greater flexibility around working time for working parents and the change that the government's introduced means that there is the potential for changes to happen. And do you think that things will just evolve and it will get to the stage where actually working a 4-day week becomes the de facto standard, not through any sort of big legislation, but just through the evolution of society?
I think the pace of change is extraordinary. I can remember when I was about 10 having a conversation with my father in which I have an older sister and a younger sister, in which we were sort of talking about future life choices, and at one point he said, but the difference between you and your sisters is that you will have to support a family. Now, that is, and it has said both of my sisters earn more than I do now. So, sorry, Dad. And far more successful. But
was it directly because of that chat? They were both like, well, actually, fuck you, Dad.
Quite possibly. That was just in whatever it was, 1980, 1984, 1985. That was a relatively reasonable thing for somebody to think. That is not the conversation that you would have now. And the constant pace, the idea when I had my children, paternity leave, I think I was entitled to 3 days.
Wow.
And not paid either, or barely paid. I think the sort of 3 days, it was really small. Now, I have colleagues who've taken 6 months off. So the pace of change, you've got to understand I'm really old, but the pace of change has been very, very fast.
What proportion of British adults do you think would support a 4-day week?
I don't know, Joe. What proportion of British adults would support?
You have to guess it's the
come
game.
on, you have to play the game. You haven't listened to this podcast at all, have you, Rob?
Yeah, it's almost like,
I don't really do podcasts.
That's the spirit.
It's 40%?
40%? MLC, what do you think?
I'd probably say a very slight majority, because actually I don't trust British people. They really like being miserable. So I would say 55.
57%. So well done.
there you go.
Well done. Getting very, very good at that. 28% actively oppose.
On what grounds? You don't know?
We have some data on this. 7 out of 10 people think that it would make them, and indeed make the country, more happy. And so bringing happiness. Just over a third, 30.
Like the misery.
Yeah, exactly. So, interestingly, 7% of people think it would make them less happy. So having more time off work, I would not be happy with that. But I guess that says perhaps more about your life at home. 37% say that it would make them more productive, compared to 33% who think it would make them less productive, and a quarter say it would make them more prosperous. So there's definitely a more mixed message. I'm surprised actually it's not higher. I would have thought you'd see more people supporting a 4-day week.
Have you met British people genuinely? Like, they hate joy. So not a surprise at all.
Okay, moving on. Rob, you studied artificial intelligence at Edinburgh University, and as part of that, you built a rugby-playing robot.
This is true.
So given your experience with large, cumbersome objects that exist for only one purpose, I was hoping we could discuss Boris Johnson.
Very good.
Okay, that was good.
Yes, and I will take the applause. I will take the... Boris has obviously been in the news.
Let's call him Mr. Johnson.
Okay.
Can we call him Mr. Johnson?
The former Foreign Secretary, former editor of The Spectator, and occasional host of Have I Got News For You, has been in the news once again recently. What's he up to?
Well, what's he always up to? I mean, he obviously does want to be leader. He obviously does want to be Prime Minister.
Does he want to be Prime Minister now?
Well, I think that actually, do you know what? I think this is one of these things people say, oh, well, you wouldn't want it now. I actually think the problem with that is that shows that you don't really want it, because if you want it, you take it when the moment comes, because most people don't get one shot. And so if you think you've got one shot at being Prime Minister, you should take it. Which brings me to Boris Johnson, who in 2016 had one shot at being Prime Minister and was indeed the favourite to be Prime Minister. And then the ball, as it were, at his feet, the goal open, and then he walked off the pitch.
And do you think that did for him? Do you think he can come back?
Well, he thinks he can, and lots of people think he can. I've always taken. Since then I've taken the view that, as I say, most people don't even get one shot. He got one shot, and he totally blew it. And that suggests to me that that's the one shot he's going to get. We live in mad times, so maybe he will get another shot. But ways that he could have come back from that is he could have been an enormously impressive foreign secretary, say. Because one of the arguments with Boris Johnson was always, oh, well, I know that he looks like a buffoon, and, but actually if you give him a big job, he will rise to it. And there is a case that he did that as London Mayor, but, you've probably done the polling on this, but I don't think that people pay attention to the London Mayor a huge amount.
Well, the London Mayor, when it comes to polling, is quite clearly more of a sort of ceremonial position.
Yeah.
And so what Boris managed to do was get
Johnson.
So what Boris Johnson managed to do was, although actually, it's just to pick up on
not
that point,
calling him Boris. I'm not.
I understand that, but there is something about London mayors and the history that we have with London mayors. Ken, we've had Ken, we've had Boris, and we've had Sadiq. It is a sort of strange position that attracts this sort of familiarity. And now, I know that Boris is obviously an example, but when it comes to London Mayor, you can appeal across the parliamentary divide, across the political divide, and get support from all different party supporters, because your role is more sort of ceremonial. And Boris managed that. He had over 50% support from supporters of all parties during his time, and
actually, so if the job is to make people feel good about themselves, he was quite good at making Londoners feel good about themselves in a sort of cosmopolitan European city kind of way. There was a time when Boris Johnson was in favour of London being a cosmopolitan European city, and he was very good at it. And the trouble is that being Prime Minister is a bit more than just sort of making people feel good about themselves.
Well, that's the thing. You have to come down on one side or the other.
Yeah.
And once Brexit happened, that's when the change was made.
So what's he up to? They are. It's just funny. I was watching him yesterday in The Economist for Free Trade.
Two of them.
Well, no, the S in that Economist was doing quite a lot of heavy lifting, which was, it was so there's this photo now that everyone's got, which of sort of in fact, there's a wide shot photo that was, I saw somewhere, you can see on the other side of the room, I've got my head in my hands too. Because it really was one of those, it was one of those things where sort of, you're sitting there and you think, he's just said that tariffs are going to go down, but also that the money we're going to get from tariffs is going to go up. Did I hear that right? Did I sort of, nobody would have said that, surely. And he actually had his eyes shut for most of it. In concentration, I thought, head in hands, eyes shut.
That power pose.
Yeah.
Famous, yeah.
Right. So questions about the former foreign secretary. Would he, if there were a contest, which it's not clear that there will be, because although there may well be a challenge to her, first they have to get through the vote of confidence. If there were a contest, would he? There will be a Stop Boris movement, and as one person said to me, the leadership contests are always about who you're not. John Major was not.
It's like French
Michael
presidential
Heseltine.
elections.
Yes, and so somebody will want to be the Stop Boris candidate. I would also say that if I were a member of the ERG and my life's goal was to get the hardest Brexit that I could, and I had this precious thing, and I had to trust my precious thing to one person. And that person I would have to trust to be reliable and not go back on their word and not shaft me.
That really feels like you're talking about someone's virginity. I'm very sorry. Right?
Would you trust your precious thing to Boris Johnson, regardless of what your precious thing was?
Are there any? I mean, with the best one in the world, there are a lot of people in politics who have regretted trusting Boris Johnson with something. So there was a point last June, the night of the election, which you will remember well, Joe, because you were explaining that one of your polls had predicted it.
Yeah, I do remember it. I have a vague recollection.
We were sitting there sort of in the Bloomberg office trying to work out what might happen, and at that point it seemed quite reasonable to say, well, it could be Boris Johnson Prime Minister. And the next thing we thought was, that would be a soft Brexit, because Boris Johnson would be able to, deliver more or less anything and turn around and say, well, that's Brexit. And it would be very hard for Jacob Rees-Mogg, who did not have his own bus during the referendum campaign, to say, actually, this is not Brexit, because Boris Johnson would have been able to say, I had a bus, and I say this is Brexit. So I mean, it's interesting. They obviously there's a contingent of them that have identified him as the man that they can trust. Well, I can't imagine they'd have got that wrong.
If not him, who?
What, for them
Me.
or for us? I thought it's interesting. The Spectator, once edited by Boris Johnson, seems to be endorsing Sajid Javid, which is interesting. The reason they haven't had a contest is because they don't know who. They don't know who, and they don't know the person. They don't have a plan. And as long as
But
they don't
apart
have
from that,
as long as the
definitely
party
there.
doesn't have a person, and it doesn't have a plan, Theresa May is sort of safe, I think. And I still think that, even in the sense that I think that the next month is going to be really, really, really tricky, and I can't quite see how she gets through it. As long as they don't have a person, they don't have a plan. Now, maybe at conference, somebody sort of steps up, and everyone goes, as happened with David Cameron in 2005, and people went, "Ooh, he's not David Davis."
Yeah, most dramatic turnaround in polling went just after that speech. He proved that it is possible to really change both the public's view and the membership's view, but it doesn't happen very often.
No,
and people had been sort of presenting David Cameron as a possible option.
This time, I think my money is on my money's on Alan Mack.
Marie, your money's always on Alan Mack.
Yes, it is.
Whatever your precious thing is.
I will sue you, Joe.
Moving on then, Rob, what do you like on your pizza?
pepperoni.
Just pepperoni?
Well, I quite like some green peppers and olives as well.
Pepperoni 56%, olives 33%, green peppers.
The little green and red peppers. So
60%, fourth most popular option. Marie?
So I knew where this was going because I think you saw my tweet. So yes, now I will say, and I'm not ashamed, if I'm very hungover, the one thing that will sort me out is a pizza with tuna, prawns, capers, buffalo mozzarella, and gorgonzola.
You disgust me.
I don't know, is that a combination of like salty and salty and salty?
Yeah,
Just, like,
that
makes it-
combination.
Is that something that you order in the morning with your hangover?
So actually, after...
Or do you keep them in the fridge?
Or when you're still drunk? I like capers. Put capers on it. Who doesn't love capers on
The last time I
pizza?
ordered it, I tried to order it for dinner, but sadly did not make it to 6 p.m. before ordering it, which is a source of great shame.
This was a survey that came up after the discussion about whether you should have pineapple on a pizza.
No.
Rob,
No.
we're all agreed on that. We're all agreed on that. But oddly, the public, 53% of people like pizza with pineapple and ham.
Oh, the jokes we could have made if it had been 1% lower.
But 41% dislike it. What do you think the most popular pizza topping, Rob?
It's not pepperoni.
It's not pepperoni.
Why is it
No,
not pepperoni?
pepperoni. Firstly, pepperoni is meat, so that's a clue. Not everyone eats meat.
Mushroom?
Pepperoni is actually level with chicken, and I don't think chicken.
Oh,
should be
that's
allowed.
wrong.
Chicken should be allowed
There's
on pizza.
the French campsite that we used to go to had a really nice Bombay chicken pizza.
Bombay chicken pizza.
I know it sounds odd, but it's really
Okay,
nice.
Are you the
which
type-
bit of France? Which bit of France?
The Vendée.
Oh, that is not too far. no.
Niche
it's not my
joke
level.
coming up, listeners.
There's no tomato. It was just a sort of creamy chicken. It was
Creamy chicken
That
pizza.
sounds awful.
Are you the type of person to go to Iceland and buy the chicken tikka fajita pizza?
I haven't. I have.
When's your birthday?
Yeah, pepperoni and chicken level with each other, 56%. Below, peppers, ham, 61%, onion, which I always think is a bit weird.
Red onion. I can do red onion.
And the top, mushrooms, 65%. I think mushrooms are a safe option, you see.
You're never sure
you always like
mushrooms on
something
your pizza.
and mushroom.
Yeah.
Ham and mushroom, exactly. Ham and pineapple,
Yeah.
absolutely disgraceful. Yeah. Tuna, Marie, because I know you're interested, 22%. So,
anchovies?
So anchovies, 18%.
Really? Anchovies are good as well?
No, you're
What's
both
the
wrong.
least popular?
Least popular, something else.
Right.
Not very good for data. But there we are. I'd like to say thank you to Rob. The book is Agent Jack, The True Story of MI5 Secret Nazi Hunters. It's out now and available from all good Amazons. Afraid there was no time for our interview with Michelle Barnier. Just time for a quick look at some of the many reviews we've received on iTunes. It's conference season now, so we're going to be off for a bit, but please remember to download, subscribe, rate, and review. Thanks very much. Please remember to like, subscribe, review, all these different things that help people hear about us, and do tell all of your friends and many of the people that you don't know, even if you haven't enjoyed the podcast. This is a Poddo podcast produced by Nick Hilton, and our theme tune is by Joe Button.
For more details, go to podopods.com, and for sales and advertising, email nick@podopods.com.
And yes, that's spelled PODOTPODS.com.